I've been running a lot lately. It's a great way to stay in shape, but that's not really why I do it. Mostly, I just like the fresh air and the freedom. It gives me time to think. An hour or so with my MP3 player and the sidewalk as company can really put the office blues and relationship problems into perspective. It all seems a world away. Not that this is an avoidance tactic. I really feel that this time for myself, just reflecting, helps me deal with problems in a more measured and effective way when the time comes. I wholeheartedly recommend it. Just be careful. I guess. I don't know how to say this. You and I had a big fight a couple weeks ago, funny enough, but now I've forgotten what it was even about. Like I said, running, it takes your mind off of everything. I was stressed and needed to get out of the house, to walk a little on the sidewalk, and distract myself. I took one of my favorite routes. In a city like this, you have to put up with the cityscapes, but there's a nice little park near my house. I'm sure we've been there once or twice. I usually avoid the park after sunset, just common sense, but I needed some greenery to improve my mood. I decided I would do a lap around the outside of the park, close enough to be scenic, but not too mindless. It was about 10:15, so while the streets weren't completely deserted, it was possible to walk for a while without encountering pedestrians or even cars on the road. I was glad for that. Usually, my thoughts can only roam freely when I'm completely immersed in my own world, and being alone always helps. At least at first, I was glad. When I saw the dark outlines of the trees lining the park, I felt a strange, creeping sense of unease. I was unable to drown out this irrational feeling, even with music, because at this point, my iPod began to malfunction. As I approached the park, the soothing sounds of Seven Nation Army by the White Stripes began to be replaced by strange static. It sounded like a quiet but insistent cacophony of voices talking or laughing, blending together into a single unintelligible sound. I made a mental note that I had one more problem to deal with tomorrow. As creepy as it was to hear that sound, the broken iPod made me temper my fervor even more with a good long run. Still, I was beginning to wish there were more people around or that it was a little brighter outside. It would have been even better if the moon hadn't been hidden behind a dark, foreboding cloak of clouds. But I kept going, because what could be worse? Well, I'll tell you. As I began to circle the outside of the park's 3-foot metal fence, a large central field became visible through a gap in the tree crowns. During the day, the field was mostly occupied by people playing sports, soccer, frisbee, jogging like me, or whatever. Obviously, there was no such activity at night, but the field wasn't empty either. A muffled yell drew my attention to a figure. No, 2 figures in the center of the field. One was holding the other as if in an embrace. In fact, at first, it seemed as if they were kissing, or perhaps the larger of the two was stroking the neck of the smaller one. It seemed a strange time and place for romance, but I kept running. It was none of my business. Then, the larger figure suddenly wrenched its head sharply away from what seemed to be a kiss. I understood less and less. It let go of the second figure, which seemed to be falling to the ground. But as I ran, the view was blocked by trees. I didn't feel the need to stop and observe what was happening. The scene was increasing my sense of unease. But I could still convince myself that it was just a couple of strange people loitering in the park. However, as the trees thinned, my illusions were quickly shattered. The second figure was indeed now sprawled on the ground, and the first was bending over it. This stopped me in my tracks. Although it was hard to see in the darkness, and I still wasn't entirely sure that I wasn't accidentally spying on someone's weird outdoor sexcapade, then the moon appeared. Suddenly, the scene bathed in the bright white light of the nearly full moon took on an alarming clarity. Although the distance still made it difficult to make out details, I could see quite clearly that the victim's body and limbs, it was now obvious, were twitching violently as the hulking figure leaned over her, tearing and tearing, feeding. The moonlight must have illuminated me too, because the creature in the field suddenly stopped and looked straight at me. I only spent a second standing there, panicked, but that second would haunt me as long as I've lived, Two eyes that I couldn't see from where I was even if they were glowing, which seems impossible, burned through me. I felt it looking at me. No, it wasn't just that. I felt it smiling at me. With huge, jagged teeth jammed haphazardly into a mouth still gory and red from its last meal, it smiled. I knew it. I didn't see it. I sure as hell didn't imagine it. I just knew it. Then I ran. The road I was on paralleled the park and had few turns, so I knew I had a long way to go before I could really put some distance between myself and the thing. I took a couple of glances at the field as I raced down the middle of a deserted road, moving faster than I ever thought possible, even as an experienced runner. There was the victim, carelessly stretched out on the grass. No sign of the creature. I looked back to where I was going and saw this bastard. He sat languidly and mockingly on the lamppost right in my path. How was it so fast? This was my first good look at the creature. Blood still dripped from the ferocious claws at the ends of its disproportionately long arms that hung behind the light it squatted against. The mouth, still grinning, was exactly as I had imagined it, and yet, to make matters worse, it covered most of the creature's face, which seemed biologically impossible. The eyes glowed with a faint red light. Overall, this thing reminded me of some kind of giant, emaciated monkey or ugly, hairy man. I was trapped, and it was simply impossible to escape from this thing. I wasn't even sure that I could run. Up close, the creature's gaze was hypnotic. My limbs felt heavy. My eyes started to burn. I just wanted it to end. Slowly, a loud rushing sound filled my ears. Suddenly, the creature quickly jumped out of the light onto the nearest tree and disappeared from sight. It disappeared, but I felt dizzy, as if I had been marked in some incomprehensible way. My eyes were still burning, and the space around me seemed to become lighter, as if illuminated by a pale light. The rushing sound only became louder. Then it dawned on me. I mean the car. Don't worry, there were no serious injuries. Apparently, the driver noticed me in time and pressed the brakes, so it was mostly just bruises. When I woke up in a hospital bed, the doctors told me I was lucky. But I admit, I didn't feel so lucky when I saw a flash of red eyes and yellowed teeth through the hospital window on the 3rd floor. Anyway, I wrote you this letter to explain why I wasn't at the hospital when you came to see me, and why you haven't seen me at all since then. And well, I've been running a lot lately. Pray for me. With love, John.